And welcome back. We're at the Glenn Gerberg Weather and Climate Summit. I'm Dave Jones with Storm Center Communications. This is the last question and answer session that we have today and for the summit. We started on Monday and we're ending this Thursday here in Breckenridge, Colorado. To my left, we have Jeff Lukas, and he spoke this afternoon, or in the last session this morning. Margaret Davidson right here in the center. And also Ned Gardiner from NOAA on the right-hand side of my right-hand side. And so we're going to open up the questions to you, the internet audience. So Sarah will read any questions that appear, and then she will pick up the microphone and ask those questions, and hopefully we'll keep it going. And we'll keep this live until all the questions are answered. So I'm just going to step off camera here and walk over to Sarah and see if Sarah has the first question.
Okay, welcome panel. My first question comes from Mike, and it's from Margaret.
Okay.
Hold on 1 second.
Is your mic on?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay.
He asks, I am often confronted by home builders who want nothing to do with preventive measures. Maryland is a good example. How do you make progress with groups that are highly resistant to climate change or environmental considerations such as sea level rise?
Well, actually, the state of Maryland has just put out a climate adaptation plan that establishes buffers. They're actually working with a number of folks on the islands in Chesapeake Bay, working with folks in Chesapeake Bay on those challenged, I won't say endangered yet, islands, about how they might think about a different kind of future. That was actually a conversation I was having earlier this week at the Urban Land Institute. How do we begin working with the National Home Builders Association so that we think about not only what are our preferred sites, but where we develop and how we developed in the future. So that's possible. It's actually the rebuilding and the infill that's a little more challenged. What do you do about communities that have been damaged and all anyone wants to do is get back to their life and livelihood? It's a little bit more challenged. Some things we can do. We do know how to do from an engineering perspective. Other countries spend more money helping citizens to relocate than we tend to do in this country. But I think there's going to have to be a big public-private initiative around just those issues. And we're going to have to figure out how we help people with limited means maintain their livelihoods and maybe either make their homes more resilient in the short run or think differently about where they want to live.
Thank you, Margaret. Okay, this question is for Jeff. Some ominous statements were made at the end of your talk about possibly running out of water. How do you feel about the outlook of our water supply? And do you think we need to undo some infrastructure and recreate infrastructure that would use or consume less water?
So yes, the prospect of any of the paleo droughts that I showed recurring has some serious implications for those basins in which water supplies are already stretched under our current climate. Would I recommend redoing infrastructure? Probably not. My impression, and this is not necessarily my area of expertise, is that conservation, many conservation measures can be done without additional infrastructure. Anything from using low-flow toilets to xeriscaping, decisions that can be made at the household or consumer level and facilitated by a municipality or water utility. I think it was interesting, the governor of Colorado, John Hickenlooper, in remarks last year, pointed out that in Germany and Australia, per capita domestic water use is something like between 1/4 and 1/6 of what is typical in the United States. So his point was not necessarily that we need to immediately reduce water use in Colorado or elsewhere in the U.S. by 3/4 or 5/6, but we have a long ways to go with basic conservation measures that could be done before we have to think about replumbing our infrastructure.
Thank you, Jeff. This question is for Margaret. Can you give us a few more examples of using Mother Nature's efficacy?
Certainly I can. So let me just have a quick little litany. After the Indian Ocean tsunami, the parts of Thailand where they had mowed down the dunes to build resorts, were destroyed, and the places that had left their dunes still standing were relatively undamaged. But we don't have to think about Thailand. We can actually think about other places. There is a place on Staten Island where they had actually created wetlands. I think it's on the backside of Staten Island, where they created wetlands a few years ago as part of a mitigation for a development project. And in that area on the backside of Staten Island, where those wetlands absorbed a lot of that water, there was actually notably much less damage than there was on the other side of Staten Island. Similarly, I mentioned the Long Beach, New Jersey example. There are a number of them. Many states, an increasing number of states are having them. More importantly, these examples aren't just limited to the coast, although those are the things I tend to be the most concerned about. We have demonstrated on a number of our riverine systems that even created wetlands can provide the same flood retention values that are near the same flood retention values that natural wetlands do.
Thank you, Margaret. This question is for Ned Gardiner. Can you expand a little bit on the biggest successes of climate.gov, and who are your biggest customers taking advantage of the services you offer?
I think one of the things that we've done extremely well is to take complex science reporting, such as the Arctic Report Card, which has come up a number of times at this conference, and create high-level summaries with very clear graphics to explain in a quick, for a reader who maybe only has 20 minutes to take in complex science information in their day, they can get 9 very quick high-level bullets about how the Arctic system has changed. And by many measures, the Arctic of the 20th century is gone. So I think we've been very successful in taking those complex reports and making them understandable. Our audience, one of my key audiences, is broadcast meteorologists, which is why I'm here. But we're really working to get more people involved in the conversation nationally around climate, because climate does affect all aspects of our society. Everyone's asking questions about why is the weather weird, but more importantly, how does that affect how I build my house? How does that affect my business practice, the outlook of my business? And so this information is something that we feel strongly can be read and understood by people from diverse walks of life if they take the time to sit and digest it.
Thank you, Ned. This question is for Jeff. Is there any reflection in the tree ring record of the known PDO cycles going back the past couple of centuries?
Yeah, so the question is about the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which is kind of a longer-term flavor, you might say, of ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, which is the shift back and forth from cooler to warmer conditions, mainly in the tropical Pacific. And yes, you can, because conditions in the tropical Pacific, as I discussed in my talk, have fairly consistent effects on precipitation in Western North America. You can use tree rings in Western North America to provide a reconstruction of the PDO and also of ENSO back several centuries. I think the longest one goes back about 500 years. Now it depends, that reconstruction depends on what we call the teleconnection between conditions in the tropical Pacific Ocean and these trees growing in the western part of North America to remain stable over that time. We believe that's the case. So yes, we can use tree rings to get a longer term look at PDO. And what we find is that the oscillation, the period of it, which is every several decades, flipping back and forth, has remained relatively consistent over time, and the strength of the PDO as well.
I have a question, Margaret, for you. People who have condominiums up and down the coastline, what should they worry about now, or what steps should they take to make sure that they are, at least in their own minds, happy with the property they have, or should they sell and get out?
Well, as I pointed out, it's not just a function of geomorphology, it's a function of geography as well. The challenge is in condos and townhouses, besides the fact that they're already in existence, it's also that you can't actually control how that structure was put up in the first place. Now, the Institute of Business and Home Safety has, in fact, been working with home builders and others to come up with ways to retrofit existing housing. How can you put a more secure roof on? Because protecting your envelope, the roof, the windows, the doors, is everything in a high wind environment. So they've already been working on those kinds of protective devices. And for water, we know that elevation works, and for surge, we know that there are some ways that you can help protect yourself there in the short run. So if you have a condo, you might want to think about accelerating the amortization of it. If you're in South Florida, you really might want to accelerate both the amortization and your preparation. You might not want to think about it as a legacy issue for your grandchildren. You might want to think about it differently than you're currently constructing it. And if you're, for instance, in other places like, say, the Outer Banks of North Carolina or the New Jersey shore, you might want to take the opportunity to just figure out how you get together $10,000 to $20,000 to raise your house, because it will buy you another few decades.
And just following up and backing up a little bit, Margaret, I know you have a relatively new position at NOAA. Can you describe what it is that your agency does?
Well, my organization, the Office of Ocean and Coastal Resource Management, is, well, it's unique in its authorities among the federal government because the legislation which established the National Coastal Management Program says that it is our job, both nationally as well as at state and local levels, to balance economic development and coastal environmental management. And why that may seem not very intuitive at first glance, if you recognize that more than 60% of the nation's economy occurs in coastal counties, and you see that there's a close correlation between sustaining the goose that lays the golden egg for the national economy. So my organization works with state and local governments to provide them the tools, as well as, we hope, systematic and occasionally episodic funding to help support having state authorities and state capabilities, as well as local execution. Because in the U.S., we don't actually believe in national land use planning, and all land use planning is really the province of the local government.
This question is for Ned. The stories that you feature with the people that you go and interview about the impacts of climate change in their community and in their financial outlook and their homes and their neighborhoods, are you finding direct results from raising the visibility of the issues that they're dealing with as far as government or policy or their budget problems?
Well, the people who are entrusted with really distributing that information are the people you would go to for information anyway. So your ag extension agents we're finding that those are the best people to educate about climate because they talk directly to farmers. So likewise with building codes, educating people who are in a position to help people on the ground make better decisions are really a critical bridge into making better decisions. So I do think that when we go out into different parts of the country and find people who are sort of the early adopters, they're showing us who the people in the community are that are the thought leaders, who are the trusted sources of information. Sometimes we find a particularly far-thinking individual who is in a position to make decisions. For example, we just did a story, and we're going to publish it soon, about Tampa Bay Water. So they have a hydrologist on staff, and her job is to help the utility, water utility, plan 6 months, 1 year ahead to set rates that are going to determine what you pay if you live in the Tampa region for your water in your home. The way she's doing that is not just by looking at statistics of the climatology of her region, but it's understanding also the influence of El Nino, La Nina, climate variability patterns. Now, for climatologists, it seems like you would definitely use that information if you were in a position of looking at water. But the water utility managers are coming along now and learning the importance of climate information. Climate variability and change obviously affect the supply of water. And so when we find someone who's using information in an innovative way, we want to show off that work to the whole industry and say, this is a way you can save money and do your job better and serve your customer better. So we're really looking for those stories as best practices and to help pave the way for other people to see how they fit into the big picture.
Thank you, Ned. Another question for Jeff. What is your opinion of the sustainable forestry practices? Are they really sustainable, or is it simply a justification for continued mass harvesting?
You know, I'm going to have to skip that one. I know of the Sustainable Forestry Practices program or programs, and I'm not well versed enough on the specifics of them, and it's a little outside of my wheelhouse, so I'm sorry, I'll have to pass.
No problem.
There is something called the Forestry Stewardship Council that does put out certain kinds of standards for not just harvesting, but for processing of the timber itself. And I do know that they have a certification program. I don't know how rigorously that it's actually audited.
Thank you. And Margaret, we have someone asking if somebody wants to get in touch with you to have you attend one of their speaking engagements. How can they do that?
It's really easy. Margaret, M-A-R-G-A-R-E-T, Davidson, D-A-V-I-D-S-O-N, at NOAA, N-O-A-A, .gov, G-O-V.
I have a question, Margaret, for you. What would you consider the nation's greatest challenge for preparing for sea level rise over the next 10, 20, 30 years?
I think it's at two levels. I think there is a national challenge in appreciating how important this issue is to our economic well-being, our national security, our food security even. Although I am not terribly optimistic that that will happen anytime really soon. But of course, in recent years, because of the record disaster losses and the challenges on FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program, we have already seen some modifications to that program this past summer, and I suspect we'll be discussing some more modifications. In the short run, I think there's nothing that beats personal awareness and personal responsibility. People are more likely to take action if they understand how an issue relates to them and what are those strategies that are easily accessible to them. So I think that how we get this information out to individuals as well as professional and scientific organizations, businesses, I think that's a really important thing for us to do over the next 5 to 10 years, because right now we're making fundamental decisions about our physical footprint on the coastal landscape. We're going to be spending a lot of money rebuilding our roads and bridges over the next 10 years because it's important to us economically, because it's going to create jobs, and yet we can make basic decisions right now with those roads: elevation, not to elevate, inside the 10-year floodplain, outside the 100-year floodplain, that can affect how much damage we're going to experience in the future. So I think we have to have a multi-level strategy as we roll forward. The art of war says that if you neither hold the high ground nor you have all the resources you need, you have to attack on as many fronts as possible.
And Margaret, just to follow up to that, what is your opinion on suggestions of building seawalls to protect some major coastal areas?
Well, I do think politically and economically significant areas will be able to muster the financial resources to build physical barriers to help reduce their losses. There's, of course, two issues around that. At the end of every barrier, because it must have an end, you exacerbate the losses. So some win, some lose, and that's always a difficult conversation. It involves issues related to social, political, and economic equity.
Okay, this question is from me. It's for the entire panel. I imagine you guys are all going to have a different answer for this. But in today's world, despite the political and social resistance to the idea of climate change and the budget issues surrounding the government involvement and even on the research level, could you tell me how you think your information and all of your hard work is best getting out there to the people who need to hear it, whether it be through print or through the internet or social media or something else that I haven't thought of? What are your thoughts on how you're best reaching the public and most successfully?
I'll go first. I think that's a fantastic question. I think the way that this is going to happen is from the bottom up. I was at COP15 distributing data visualizations to world leaders, negotiating a climate treaty, and it was at that event that I realized I want to be working at an individual level and on a community level to get information to people who are making decisions every day. Because if you're not using climate information, you're at a disadvantage for making good decisions. I think the way I will measure that, whether I'm being effective, is how many people pick up and use the data visualizations that I'm making, but also the information I'm drawing on, which is a vast wealth of information from NOAA and other agencies and academics, just to help people put their life, livelihood, and decisions in a bigger context.
So building on Ned's comments, I think it is very important that we use all the tools that we currently have and can imagine. So I believe that not only must it be bottom up, that we have to look to important intermediaries like broadcast meteorologists, professional and scientific associations, Rotary clubs, garden clubs, however it is that you can find that venue of access, that method of communication, and we need to do that. But I also think, for instance, one of the things that we should be talking about is we need to be working more with the online gaming community. It's a very important worldwide industry. I've had some really casual talks with those people, but I think there are some opportunities to build scenarios into that. Maybe like the latest version of SimCity or whatever, but there are other possibilities. Instead of Warcraft, maybe we could have Climate Craft or something like that. So I think we need to be highly imaginative. Maybe we need an X Prize for this sort of thing.
Well, for the work that I do in paleo drought and communicating that information to people who might make decisions based on it, or at least incorporate it into their planning, personally, my communication tends to be targeted to water managers, local and regional decision makers who are managing other natural resources. Those are the ones who are most likely to use it. I tend not to focus on outreach to the general public per se, because while it's important information for them to know and understand as context for their thinking about both past, present, and future climate, it's not something that, in particular, our program focuses on. That said, I've got colleagues in the paleoclimate community who do much more public outreach and spend a lot more time with decision makers at higher levels, colleagues at the University of Arizona who testify to the Senate recently talking about increased risk of paleo drought in the future. So I think we need to have messaging going on at different levels and targeted to different audiences, because the needs for the types of decisions that may be made and the needs for those people to make those decisions vary so tremendously. So, of course, no one answer. And it helps to have a lot of different people at different levels, local, state, regional, who are versed in these sciences and can provide information to different audiences who need them.
Margaret, I have a question for you. Do you feel as though the federal government has identified climate change and impacts as a national priority, or do you think that the work needs to continue to convince those decision makers at that level that the United States really needs to start working on this issue?
Well, I'm a recovering lawyer, so I am aware that in D.C. there are actually 3 branches of government. There's the executive office, which includes all the agencies, of course, and there's Congress and the judiciary. So I would say that within the executive branch, we certainly do believe that climate change is a real issue of concern, and the draft National Climate Assessment is actually out right now for public comment, and that includes you by April 12th, please. So we believe it's important, but even after all this time, I think we're still a little bit like the adolescent. We talk about it all the time, but we rarely actually put out. So I think there's a challenge there. And looking at diminished resources, I think we have to pursue transgovernmental, transsectoral leverage partnerships. So we're going to have to juke one another in order to come together to make this happen, because it's not happening at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. Climate's not the only issue that's not happening at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, as you know. Anybody knows who reads anything in the news. But clearly, climate has become one of those contentious issues which is being treated as an ideological barrier. In the meantime, people are suffering, people are at risk, and our economies, the stability of our economies are in jeopardy. So, like my colleagues, you know, there's more than one way to foment a revolution.
I think, well, look at that. It's perfectly 2 o'clock out here in Breckenridge. And so Sarah has no other online questions or tweeted questions. So I'd like to thank everyone, Ned, Margaret, and Jeff. Thank you so much for joining us, not only for the Weather and Climate Summit, but for joining us back here to give the internet audience an opportunity to interact with you, because they don't see you on a regular basis. This is a great opportunity. So thanks very much, and thank you for watching here online. We appreciate your attention over the last 4 days. And with this, we're going to be signing off from Breckenridge, Colorado, and hope to see you back here. We'll be back in Breckenridge next January in 2014. I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about. So we look forward to seeing you then, and we'll be having the videos posted up on the website probably within the next day or two. So look forward to that, and thanks again for joining us. So long from Breckenridge.